Shadows of the Frontier, The Tale of Jedediah Ghost Morgan. Part 1. The Unmaking of a Man. The sun bleeds across the horizon like a wound that won't heal. That's how I've come to see every dawn these past 20 years. Each new day, another reminder that I'm still breathing when so many others ain't. Some might call that luck. I call it punishment. Folks around these parts know me as Ghost Morgan. Wasn't always so. Used to answer to Jedediah back when I had a mother who'd call me to supper and a father who taught me to ride before I could properly walk. That life seems like it belonged to someone else now, someone better. I'm penning these words from a cramped room above Willamete's only saloon, the Silver Spur. Outside my window, the town's starting to wake. Shopkeepers sweep their stoops, ranch hands stumble home from cards, and the sheriff makes his morning rounds, tipping his hat to the ladies. He don't tip it to me. Smart man. My hands ain't steady like they once were. The whiskey helps with that, though it brings other troubles. Doc Pearson says my liver's turning mean as a rattler in July. But what's one more enemy when your wanted poster hangs in 12 territories? You're wondering why a notorious shootist like myself is scratching out his story instead of dying proper, with boots on and gun in hand. Truth is, I got the consumption. Been spitting blood for 3 months now. Figure I might as well leave something behind besides bullet holes and grieving kin. So pull up a chair, stranger. Pour yourself 3 fingers of courage. This ain't no tale for the faint-hearted or those looking for heroes. This here's the unvarnished truth of how a man becomes a monster, one choice at a time. I was born in '49, same year as the great California gold rush. Pa always said that was fitting. Said I came into this world hungry for something that wasn't mine to take. Ma would hush him then, cross herself and mutter prayers in her soft Irish lilt. Should have listened to Pa, might have saved everyone a heap of sorrow. Our spread was nothing special. 50 acres of stubborn soil in West Texas. Too dry for farming. Too sparse for proper ranching. Pa worked that land like it owed him salvation. And maybe in his mind it did. He'd fought for Texas independence, carried Comanche arrow scars across his back, and believed with bone-deep certainty that a man's worth was measured by what he could coax from the earth with his own 2 hands. Ma was different. Born Elizabeth O'Connor, daughter of Irish immigrants who'd fled the potato famine only to die of cholera in New Orleans. She'd grown up in a convent, learned letters and numbers and the fear of God. How she ended up married to a sun-weathered Texas rancher with more grit than grace is a mystery I never solved. Love, I reckon, makes fools of even the wise. My earliest memories are of dust. It got everywhere, in your food, your eyes, under your fingernails. During the dry months, which was most months, it'd hang in the air like a promise unfulfilled. I remember Ma hanging wet sheets over the windows, trying to catch the dust before it settled on her spotless floors. A losing battle if ever there was one. We weren't poor, not by frontier standards. We had a solid roof, food on the table, and Pa's reputation kept the worst elements at bay. But we weren't prosperous neither. Each season was a gamble against nature's cruelty. Drought, blue northers, grasshopper plagues. Some years the cattle would fatten nice. Other years we'd lose half the herd to disease or winter storms. That's the cowboy's life, Jed, Pa would say, squinting at the horizon like he could see tomorrow coming. You gotta ride the rough patches, same as the smooth. Pa taught me about cattle and horses, how to read the weather, how to track game. Ma taught me my letters, Bible verses, and to say please and thank you, even to those who didn't deserve such courtesies. Between them, they aimed to raise a decent man. Shame I turned out to be such a disappointment. I had a younger sister, Mary. She was born when I was 5, arrived squalling and red-faced into our world. I remember peering into her cradle, wondering what all the fuss was about. She was just a noisy bundle that took up Ma's time and made Pa smile more than he ever did at me. But as she grew, so did my affection for her. Mary had Ma's auburn hair and Pa's stubborn chin. By age 4, she was following me everywhere, calling me Jetty because she couldn't manage my full name. I pretended it annoyed me, but truth be told, I loved being her hero. She looked at me like I hung the moon and stars and for her sake, I wanted to be worthy of that gaze. Life had a rhythm back then. Up before dawn to help with chores, breakfast of cornmeal mush or salt pork and biscuits. Then lessons with Ma until midday, after which I'd help Pa with whatever needed doing. Mending fences, breaking horses, driving cattle to new pasture. Evenings were for family, Ma reading from the Bible or one of her precious novels, Pa cleaning his rifle and spinning yarns about the old days, Mary falling asleep against my shoulder. Simple days, good days, the kind you don't appreciate until they're long gone. Everything changed the summer I turned 12. That was the year of the great drought, as folks came to call it, April to September without a drop of rain. Crops withered in the fields, streams and water holes dried up. Cattle grew gaunt, their ribs pressing against dusty hides like barrel staves. Pa's face grew more lined with each passing week. He'd ride out before dawn and return after dusk, moving the herd from one failing pasture to another, searching for water where there was none to be found. Ma stretched our supplies, thin as paper, but there's only so much economizing a body can do when the land itself turns hostile. By August, we were down to our last barrel of flour and a handful of cattle, too weak to drive to market. Pa made the decision to ride to San Angelo, where he'd heard the bank was extending credit to established ranchers. It was a 3-day journey, and he was reluctant to leave us. But necessity makes hard choices easier to bear. "You're the man of the house while I'm gone, Jedediah," he told me the morning he left, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "Look after your ma and sister. Keep your pa's rifle clean and loaded, but pray you won't need it." I nodded solemnly, chest puffed with the responsibility. At 12, I thought myself nearly grown, capable of handling whatever came our way. I was a damn fool. Pa had been gone 2 days when they came. 3 riders, trail-worn and hard-eyed. I was in the barn, mucking stalls, when I heard Ma call out a greeting. There was a note in her voice I'd never heard before, tight, like a fiddle string, tuned too high. I peered through a crack in the barn door. The men had dismounted but remained by their horses. The one in front, tall with a beard streaked gray and a scar running from temple to jaw, was doing the talking. I couldn't make out the words, but his stance was all wrong. Not the respectful posture men took when speaking to another man's wife, but something predatory. Ma stood on the porch, shotgun in hand. Mary hid behind her skirts, eyes wide with uncertainty. I should have run to the house right then. Should have grabbed Pa's rifle from over the mantel. Should have done something, anything other than stand frozen, watching disaster unfold like a slow-motion nightmare. The tall man said something that made Ma raise the shotgun, but before she could aim proper, the second rider, younger, wearing a red bandana, drew and fired in one fluid motion. The sound of the shot echoed across our quiet homestead. Birds scattered from the roof, and Ma crumpled like a marionette with cut strings, the shotgun clattering useless beside her. Mary's scream pulled me from my stupor. She bolted from the porch, running not toward the house where she might find safety, but toward Ma's fallen form. The third rider, a squat man with a Mexican sombrero, caught her easily, scooping her up as she kicked and wailed. Something broke inside me then. Fear gave way to blind rage. I burst from the barn, Pa's skinning knife clutched in my trembling hand. I don't recall crossing the yard, don't remember the words I must have shouted. All I remember is the tall man turning, his face registering surprise, then amusement. His boot caught me square in the chest, sending me sprawling in the dust. The knife skittered away. "Well, looky here," he drawled, looming over me. "The calf thinks he's a bull." The one in the bandana laughed, high and cruel. "What you reckon, Cobb? Should we leave him for the buzzards or take him along?" The tall man, Cobb, studied me like I was an interesting insect. "Might be worth something to someone. Throw him on your horse, Reese." I fought, of course, kicked and bit and scratched like a wildcat, earned myself a pistol whipping that left my head ringing and my vision blurred. Last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Mary's tear-streaked face as the Mexican rider bundled her onto his horse. Last thing I heard was Cobb giving orders to burn the house. When I came to, our home was a smoldering ruin against the Texas night, and I was bound hand and foot across a saddle, headed God knows where. That was the day Jedediah Morgan died, though his heart kept beating. That was the day the ghost was born. They were outlaws, of course, not the romantic kind from dime novels, but the genuine article, cruel men who lived by preying on the weak. Cobb McLaren was their leader, a former Confederate cavalry officer turned bandit after the war left him with nothing but bitter memories and a talent for violence. Reese Dalton was his right hand, barely 20, but already with 5 notches on his gun. The Mexican called himself Lobo, though I doubted that was his real name. They were part of a larger gang that worked the territories between Texas and Mexico, rustling cattle, robbing stages, and occasionally hiring out their guns to whoever paid best. Their main hideout was an abandoned mission in the Chisos Mountains, so remote and well-defended that even the Texas Rangers gave it a wide berth. That's where they took us, Mary and me, a 3-day ride through dust and heat, with brief stops to water the horses and choke down jerky and hardtack. They kept us tied and separated. I caught glimpses of Mary, her dress torn and dirty, her eyes vacant with shock. Each time our gazes met, I silently promised her rescue, salvation, revenge, everything I was powerless to deliver. The mission was impressive in a desolate way. Stone walls rising from a high mesa, commanding views in all directions. Inside the walls was a collection of buildings in various states of disrepair. The chapel, now used as a common area, the dormitories converted to sleeping quarters, stables, a cookhouse. About 20 men called it home, though riders came and went regularly, bringing supplies, information, and occasionally other captives. Cobb presented us to the gang's true leader, a man known only as the Judge. Why he had that moniker, I never learned. Nothing about him suggested law or order. He was older than the others, with steel-gray hair and cold eyes that assessed everything in terms of profit and loss. Orphans, Cobb explained, shoving us forward. Ranch family out by San Angelo. Father was away. Thought they might be useful. The Judge circled us slowly. Mary shrank against me, and I tried to stand taller, though my legs trembled with exhaustion and fear. The girl can help in the kitchen, he decided, then fixed his gaze on me. What skills does the boy have? Cobb shrugged. None we witnessed. Tried to stick me with a skinning knife. A flicker of interest crossed the Judge's face. Did he now? Got sand in his craw at least? He bent to my level, his breath sour with tobacco. What's your name, boy? I wanted to spit in his face. Wanted to launch myself at him, consequences be damned. But Mary's small hand clutched mine, reminding me that my actions affected more than just myself. Jedediah Morgan, sir, I answered, the sir burning like acid on my tongue. Well, Jedediah Morgan, here's how things stand. You and your sister are now property of this outfit. You work, you obey, you might live to see another birthday. You cause trouble. He let the threat hang unfinished. Mary was taken to the cookhouse, assigned to an old Mexican woman who ran the kitchen. I was given to Reese Dalton, supposedly to learn useful skills. Those first months were hell distilled. Reese was a cruel master, quick with his fists and quicker with his tongue. I cleaned his tack, tended his horse, polished his boots, endured his mockery and abuse. At night, I slept on the stable floor, too exhausted to do more than check that Mary was still alive and relatively unharmed before collapsing into dreamless sleep. But youth is resilient, and humans adapt to survive. Gradually, I learned the rhythms of the camp, the hierarchies, the unspoken rules. I made myself useful to others besides Reese, helping the blacksmith, running messages, tending injured horses. I listened and watched and remembered everything. I saw Mary twice daily, morning and evening meals. We weren't allowed to speak much, but we developed our own silent language of glances and gestures. She was safer than I'd feared, protected by the old cook who treated her like a granddaughter. The Judge had decreed that no one was to touch her, though whether from decency or future plans, I couldn't say. 6 months into our captivity, Reese decided I was ready to learn more valuable skills. He took me along on a cattle rustling expedition. Not to participate, just to mind the camp and tend the horses while the men did the actual stealing. Still, it was my first time beyond the mission wall since our arrival. "Don't get no silly notions about escaping," Reese warned as we rode out. "Ain't nothing out there but desert and death for a greenhorn like you. Besides, you run. Your sister pays the price." I believed him. Moreover, I had no idea where we were or how to get back to civilization. The mission could have been on the moon for all the good knowing its location did me. The rustling was successful. 40 head of prime beef taken from a ranch near Valentine. On the way back, we stopped at a tiny settlement, hardly deserving of the name town. Just a general store, a saloon, and a handful of shacks. "Wait with the horses," Reese ordered, as the men headed for the saloon. "Anyone asks, we're drovers, moving stock for the Circle T." I nodded, settling in for a long wait. But after the men disappeared inside, a local boy about my age sauntered over, curious about the newcomers. "You a real cowboy?" he asked, eyeing me skeptically. I looked down at my ragged clothes and dirty hands. "Something like that." "My PA says real cowboys don't come through here this time of year. Says anyone moving cattle now is probably stealing them." My heart quickened. "Your PA a lawman?" The boy snorted. "Nah, just the store owner, but he knows Sheriff Hardin over in Valentine. Says the sheriff's offering rewards for information on cattle thieves." An idea formed, dangerous as nitroglycerin. If I could get word to this Sheriff Hardin? But no, Mary would suffer, and I'd likely be dead before help arrived. The boy kept talking, oblivious to my inner turmoil. "I'm going to be a Texas Ranger when I grow up. Gonna hunt outlaws all over the territory." I managed a thin smile. "Good luck with that." When Reese and the others stumbled out of the saloon hours later, liquored up and loose-tongued, I was exactly where they left me. The boy was long gone, and I had the first fragile threads of a plan taking shape in my mind. That night, back at the mission, I did something I hadn't done since watching our home burn. I prayed. Not for salvation or forgiveness. It was far too late for that. I prayed for patience, for cunning, for the chance to repay the suffering inflicted on Mary and me. And if God wasn't listening, well, maybe the devil was taking requests. The years at the mission blurred together, marked more by what I learned than by seasons or birthdays. I learned to ride like I was born to the saddle, to rope and track and survive in country that would kill most city folks inside a day. I learned to shoot from Lobo, who turned out to be the best marksman in the gang. I learned card tricks and how to spot a cheater from a one-eyed gambler called Dickie Malone. I learned to read men's intentions from their stance, their eyes, the way they handled their weapons. What I didn't learn was forgiveness. That part of me was buried with Ma in the ashes of our home. By 16, I was riding with the gang on smaller jobs, lookout mostly, sometimes decoy or distraction. By 17, I'd graduated to full participant, had my own horse, gun, share of the take. The judge seemed to have forgotten I was ever a captive. Reese still treated me like dirt, but he'd learned to watch his back after I broke his nose in a fight he'd expected to win easily. Only Mary and I remembered we were prisoners. She worked in the camp, cooking and mending, growing from a frightened child into a quiet young woman with watchful eyes. We talked when we could, always careful not to seem too close. The judge might have forgotten our origins, but we hadn't. "We need to leave, Jed," she whispered one night when I visited her behind the cookhouse. "There's a new girl they brought in, just 13. I can't bear to watch it happen again." I knew what she meant. The camp was no place for young women. Most didn't last long, used up and discarded or ransomed if they came from money. That Mary had survived unscathed was something of a miracle, largely due to the old cook's protection and my growing reputation as someone not to cross. "Soon," I promised. "I've been putting aside money, learning the trails. When the time is right, we'll go." But the right time remained elusive. The gang kept us moving between hideouts. There were always eyes watching, and the desert between safety and us might as well have been an ocean. My chance came the winter I turned 18. The judge sent me with Cobb and 3 others to deliver a message to a contact in El Paso. It was my first time in a real city since our capture, and the noise and bustle overwhelmed me at first. We took rooms in a hotel on South El Paso Street. Cobb went to meet the contact while the rest of us were told to lay low. But Reese, predictably, headed for the nearest saloon, dragging along young Billy Hawkins, a new recruit eager to prove himself. I followed at a distance, not because I wanted their company, but because an unattended saloon glass was the perfect place to leave a message no one would trace to me. The Red Garter was typical of border town establishments, loud, smoky, populated by a mix of cowboys, traders, soldiers from nearby Fort Bliss, and women working the oldest profession. I found a corner table, ordered whiskey, and watched Reese and Billy get progressively drunker. 2 hours in, a well-dressed man sat down across from me without invitation. His clothes marked him as Eastern, but his eyes were pure frontier, assessing, calculating. "You ride with McLaren's bunch," he said without preamble. My hand drifted to my gun. "You're mistaken, mister." He smiled thinly. "No, I'm not. You're Jedediah Morgan. Been with them since you were 12. Sister named Mary still at the Chiso's hideout. You want out. I can help with that." Ice replaced the blood in my veins. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Phillips, United States Marshal." He slid a badge across the table, keeping it mostly concealed. "I've been tracking your gang for 2 years, building a case. I need someone on the inside." I stared at him, mind racing. "Why would I help you?" "Because you're not one of them. Not really. You're a survivor doing what you must." His voice lowered. "And because I can guarantee your sister's safety when we move in." Hope flared, bright and dangerous. "And what happens to me? I've ridden with them, done things." "You were a child when they took you, forced into their life. Judge Clayton might look favorably on that, especially if you help bring down bigger fish." He slid a folded paper across the table. "Names and dates. Proof of the judge's connection to the territorial governor's brother. Get me confirmation, and we can discuss terms for you and your sister." I should have turned him down, should have reported the encounter to Cobb immediately. That would have been the safe play. Instead, I took the paper and nodded once. "I'm a dead man if they suspect," I said. Phillips didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes, so don't give them reason to." He left as unobtrusively as he'd arrived. I finished my whiskey, waited until Reese and Billy were occupied with saloon girls, then slipped out into the cool desert night. I just made a deal with the devil. Problem was, I wasn't sure which devil was worse, the law I'd agreed to help or the outlaws I'd agreed to betray. Marshal Phillips had instructed me to leave messages at dead drops, specific locations where we could exchange information without direct contact. The folded paper contained 3 such locations around the mission area, plus coded phrases to identify myself in writing. For 3 months, I played my dangerous game, listening for mentions of the territorial governor's brother, noting down meeting times and places, names of other connected officials. It wasn't easy. The judge kept his higher political dealings close to his vest, sharing details only with his inner circle, Cobb, a former lawyer turned outlaw named Whitaker, and occasionally Lobo. I volunteered for perimeter guard duty as often as possible, which gave me legitimate reasons to ride out alone. During these rides, I'd visit the dead drops, leaving what little information I'd gathered and collecting instructions from Phillips. The strain wore on me. I lost weight, slept poorly, jumped at shadows. Mary noticed, of course. "You're planning something," she accused one evening when we had a rare moment alone, "and you're not telling me." "Better you don't know," I replied, avoiding her searching gaze. "We're in this together, Jed. Always have been." I wanted to tell her. God knows I needed someone to share the burden, but the fewer people who knew, the safer the plan. So I deflected, promised we'd be free soon, and changed the subject. April brought unexpected complications. A new gang joined forces with ours temporarily. The Vasquez brothers and their crew, notorious along the border for their brutality. They were staging for a major bank robbery in Odessa and needed our local knowledge. Their arrival meant more eyes around camp, more chances to slip up. Worse, the youngest Vasquez brother, Ramon, took an immediate interest in Mary. I watched him watching her, undressing her with his eyes, and knew I needed to accelerate our plan. The opportunity came when the judge called a meeting of both gang leaders to discuss the Odessa job. I wasn't invited, of course, but I managed to position myself cleaning rifles in an adjacent room. close enough to hear snatches of conversation through the thin adobe wall. What I heard confirmed everything Phillips suspected. The bank robbery was a cover for something bigger, the assassination of a federal judge scheduled to try the territorial governor's brother for land fraud. The plot went higher than I'd imagined, with payoffs to law enforcement and telegraph operators to control information flow. This was exactly what Phillips needed. That night I rode out, ostensibly to check our eastern trails, and headed for the northernmost dead drop, an abandoned windmill 10 miles from the mission. I detailed everything I'd overheard, added the dates mentioned for the Odessa operation, and placed the message in the hollow fence post we used for communications. As I remounted my horse, a voice from the darkness froze me in place. "Mighty interesting place for a midnight ride, Morgan." Reese Dalton emerged from behind the windmill's broken tower, rifle aimed casually in my direction. "Following me, Dalton?" I kept my voice steady despite the panic clawing at my throat. "Been wondering where you sneak off to. Thought maybe you had a senorita stash somewhere." He gestured at the fence post with his rifle barrel. "But it seems you're conducting business of a different sort." I considered drawing my pistol, but Reese had me dead to rights. Even if I managed to shoot him, the sound would likely bring others who might be nearby. "It's not what you think," I tried. "No? 'Cause it looks like you're leaving messages for someone. And since you ain't got friends outside the gang," his eyes narrowed. "You turning rat on us, Morgan?" "I'm trying to save my sister," I admitted, opting for a partial truth. "The Vasquez boy has his eye on her. You know what happens to girls in camp once someone decides they want them." Reese studied me, suspicion warring with the possibility I might be telling the truth. "So what's this? Arranging passage somewhere? Buying protection?" "Something like that." He was silent long enough that I dared hope he might believe me. Then he chuckled, low and mean. "You always were a smooth liar, Morgan. Problem is, I've been watching you 3 weeks now. Seen you check this post, seen you reading whatever gets left here." He gestured with the rifle again. "Pick it up, the message you just left. Let's have a look." My mind raced. If Reese read that message, we were both dead, Mary and me, and all those people in Odessa. "No," I said and drew my revolver. Reese fired before I cleared leather. The bullet took me high in the shoulder, spinning me around and dropping me to the dirt. Pain exploded through my body, bright as lightning. My gun fell from nerveless fingers. "Shouldn't have done that, boy." Reese approached cautiously, rifle trained on my chest. "Judge is going to want to know who you've been talking to. Might go easier if you tell me first." Through a haze of pain, I saw him bend to retrieve my fallen message. In that moment, desperation gave me strength. I lunged, tackled him at the knees. We went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. What followed was ugly, desperate, void of any cowboy code or frontier honor. We fought like animals, all teeth and nails and hate. Despite my wounded shoulder, I had youth and raw survival instinct on my side. Reese had experience and a deep well of cruelty. I don't remember grabbing the rock. Don't remember bringing it down on Reese's head once, twice, 3 times. Only remember the sudden stillness afterward, the copper smell of blood, the weight of what I'd done. My first killing. I retched into the dust, body rebelling against what my hands had done. When the spasms passed, I forced myself to think. Reese's horse would return to camp eventually. They'd come looking. I needed to move fast. I retrieved my message, scrolled a hasty addendum explaining that Reese had discovered me and I had to run, but the Odessa operation was still on as scheduled. Phillips needed to know his inside man was blown. Then I searched Reese's body, taking his ammunition, money, and canteen. I dragged him behind the windmill, concealing him as best I could in the scrub brush. It wouldn't fool anyone looking closely, but might buy a few hours. My shoulder throbbed, blood soaking my shirt. The bullet had gone through clean, but I was losing blood and daylight. I mounted up, took one last look at the windmill that had witnessed my crossing of a line I could never uncross, and spurred my horse toward the border. I'd just killed a man. There would be no going back now. I rode south, away from the mission, away from Mary. It tore at me to leave her, but I reasoned that returning would only endanger her further. My best hope, our best hope, was for Phillips and his marshals to raid the hideout as planned, using the information I'd provided. The wound in my shoulder made every hoofbeat agony. By dawn, I was feverish, barely staying in the saddle. The border was still miles away, and I had no clear plan beyond putting distance between myself and Reese's body. Mid-morning, I spotted a small ranch nestled in a sheltered valley. Smoke rose from the chimney. A dog barked in the yard. Decent folks, by all appearances. The kind who'd help a wounded traveler or turn in a wanted murderer. I veered away, choosing a more difficult path through rocky terrain where pursuing riders would struggle to follow. By noon, my vision was blurring, the world tilting at odd angles. The horse, sensing my weakening grip, slowed to a walk. I remember sliding from the saddle, the ground rushing up to meet me. Remember thinking, with odd clarity, that this was a fitting end for Jedediah Morgan, dying alone in the dirt, neither outlaw nor honest man, but something caught in between. Then darkness. I woke to the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs, and the sound of Spanish being spoken softly nearby. For a confused moment, I thought I was back at the mission, that everything, Reese, the fight, the escape, had been a fever dream. Then pain lanced through my shoulder as I tried to move, and reality reasserted itself. "Be still, gringo," a woman's voice commanded. "The wound, it is clean now, but you open it again if you move." I forced my eyes open, blinking against the dim light of what appeared to be a one-room adobe hut. A woman of middle years bent over me, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined by sun and time. "Where am I?" My voice emerged as a croak. "My home." She offered a cup of water, supporting my head as I drank. "My grandson found you on our land, almost dead. Very stupid to ride with such a wound." I couldn't argue with her assessment. "Thank you for helping me," she shrugged. "Jesus says to help strangers, even gringos who smell of trouble." She studied me with shrewd eyes. "You are running from something, yes? The law? Or men worse than the law?" "Both," I admitted, seeing no point in lies. She nodded as if this confirmed her suspicions. "I am Doña Elena Varga. This is my ranch, small but mine. My husband died 10 years ago. My sons work across the border, send money when they can. You are welcome here until you heal. After that," she spread her hands in a gesture that said, "My fate was my own to determine." I stayed with Doña Elena for 2 weeks. Her grandson, Miguel, a solemn boy of about 14, kept watch for riders from the north while I recuperated. The bullet wound healed cleanly, thanks to Doña Elena's poultices and my youth, though it left a puckered scar I carry to this day. During those quiet days of recovery, I had ample time to think. About Mary, about my future, about the blood on my hands. I tried to convince myself that Reese Dalton had deserved killing. He was a murderer many times over, had abused me for years, would have delivered me to torture and death. But in honest moments, I acknowledged that I'd crossed a threshold, had confirmed what the judge perhaps saw in me from the beginning, that under the right circumstances, I could take a life. When I was strong enough to ride, Doña Elena gave me provisions, a battered sombrero for the sun, and advice I've never forgotten. "The past, it follows like a shadow," she said as we stood in her dusty yard. "You cannot outrun it, but you can choose what man the shadow is attached to." I thanked her, promised to repay her kindness someday, and rode south. Not because Mexico offered particular appeal, but because it wasn't Texas. I needed time, distance, a chance to become someone new. For the next year I drifted, worked cattle drives along the Sierra Madre, dealt Monte and Chihuahua gambling halls, rode shotgun for silver shipments between mining camps. I heard rumors of a massive lawman raid on a gang hideout in the Chisos Mountains, resulting in the deaths of several notorious outlaws, including the one they called the judge. No mention of a girl named Mary among the captives freed. The not knowing ate at me. I considered crossing back into Texas, trying to find Marshal Phillips, asking about my sister, but fear held me back. Fear that Mary hadn't survived. Fear that I was still wanted. Fear of facing the consequences of my choices. So I kept moving, working jobs that required few questions and paid in cash. I grew a beard, learned passable Spanish, became adept at being forgettable. Just another gringo drifter in a land full of men running from something. Until Nogales and the card game that would set my life on its final trajectory. Part 2, The Making of a Legend. The border town of Nogales straddled two nations, belonging fully to neither. The Mexican side bustled with mercados and cantinas, catering to American tastes for things forbidden or taxed north of the line. The American side hosted saloons, brothels, and gambling establishments, catering to Mexican desires for Yankee whiskey and games of chance. I'd been there 3 weeks, dealing faro at the Copper Queen, a mid-range establishment that attracted cowboys, miners, and the occasional businessman. The pay was steady, the clientele rarely troublesome, and the owner, a corpulent former buffalo hunter named Buell, minded his own business as long as the table showed a profit. It was a Thursday evening when they walked in, 3 men in trail dust and gun leather that had seen hard use. Even if they hadn't worn their badges openly, I'd have made them for lawmen. They moved differently than ordinary men, eyes constantly assessing, hands never far from their weapons. My pulse quickened. I'd been careful using the name Jim Garrett, keeping my head down, but old instincts die hard and mine screamed danger. The youngest of the 3 approached my table. "Dealing tonight?" I nodded, face carefully neutral. $5 minimum. He joined the game along with a drummer selling dry goods and 2 Mexican gentlemen in suits finer than the surroundings warranted. I dealt the cards mechanically, mind racing behind my professional mask. Were they here for me? Had someone from the old gang recognized me, placed a bounty? An hour into play, the lawman was up about $30. The drummer down twice that. The Mexicans played conservatively, winning and losing small amounts. I kept the game moving, trying to appear neither too interested in the lawman nor too anxious to avoid his gaze. During a break between hands, as the drummer visited the bar for liquid courage, the lawman leaned forward. "You're a long way from Texas, Morgan." My blood froze. I looked up, met his eyes properly for the first time, and recognition dawned. Not a Texas Ranger or local sheriff as I'd first thought, but a face from the wanted posters at the mission. United States Marshal Benjamin Harding, known for bringing in his quarry dead more often than alive. "Name's Garrett," I said evenly. "Think you've mistaken me for someone else?" Harding's smile never reached his eyes. "No mistake. Jedediah Morgan, rode with the McLaren Whitaker gang, wanted for questioning in the death of Reese Dalton. Marshal Phillips vouched for your cooperation in the Chiso's raid, but you disappeared before making your statement." The other players shifted uncomfortably, sensing the atmosphere change. "Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in private," one of the Mexican gentlemen suggested, glancing meaningfully at his companion. "My apologies, gentlemen," Harding said without taking his eyes off me. "Mr. Morgan and I are old acquaintances catching up." "I told you, name's Garrett," I insisted, but with less conviction. My hand inched toward the derringer I kept under the table. Harding noticed the motion. "I wouldn't. My deputies are watching. Besides, if I wanted you in irons, you'd be wearing them already." That gave me pause. "What do you want then?" "Information, and possibly your assistance with a delicate matter." He stood, dropping coins on the table for his winnings. "I'm staying at the Arizona Hotel, room 12. Come by when your shift ends. We'll talk terms." He left with a tip of his hat to the table, deputies falling in behind him. The remaining players looked at me with new interest. "Trouble, senor?" one of the Mexicans asked. I forced a laugh. "Just a case of mistaken identity. Happens in border towns." The game resumed, but my concentration was shot. I made dealer errors I hadn't made since my first weeks at the table, miscounted payouts, fumbled shuffles. Eventually, Buell noticed and sent over another dealer to relieve me early. "Sleep it off, Garrett," he growled. "You're no good to me like this." I should have gathered my things and ridden out that night, put Nogales behind me, found another anonymous town, another meaningless job. But curiosity and a ghost I couldn't shake, Mary, kept me in town. At midnight, I knocked on the door of room 12 at the Arizona Hotel. Harding opened it, looking unsurprised to see me. The room behind him was sparse but clean, his saddlebags and gun belt laid out neatly on the bed. Morgan, he acknowledged, stepping aside to let me enter. Wasn't sure you'd come. You seemed confident enough. I remained standing, back to the wall, ready to bolt if this proved to be a trap. Said something about Marshall Phillips vouching for me? Harding poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle on the dresser, offered one to me. Phillips is dead, ambushed near El Paso last year. But before he died, he filed reports about a young man inside the McLaren gang who provided critical information about the Odessa assassination plot. Said you were coerced into joining them after they murdered your family. I accepted the whiskey, but didn't drink. If you know all that, why track me to Nogales? Could have left me be. Could have, Harding agreed, sipping his drink. But we have a situation that requires someone with your unique background. I'm not interested in becoming a lawman. He chuckled. Good, because I'm not offering a badge. I'm offering a deal. You help us with this particular problem, we expunge your record. You'll be free to go wherever you please, be whoever you want. Despite my skepticism, hope kindled. What's the particular problem? Luther Cobb McLaren. The name hit me like a physical blow. Cobb, the tall man with the scar, the one who'd watched my mother die, who'd ordered our home burned. He's alive? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Harding nodded grimly. Escaped during the Chisos raid. Been rebuilding the gang since. Currently operating out of the Mogollon Rim country. Stagecoach robberies mostly. And you want me to, what? Infiltrate his new gang? Already tried playing spy once. Didn't end well. Nothing so complicated. Harding fixed me with a hard stare. We want you to kill him. I stared back, certain I'd misheard. You're a United States Marshal. You don't hire assassins. Officially, no. Unofficially, McLaren has friends in territorial politics. Twice we've had him in custody. Twice he's walked free on legal technicalities. Meanwhile, the bodies pile up. Good men, lawmen, civilians, dead because the system failed. His jaw tightened. So we're trying something outside the system. Why me? Because you know him, know how he thinks, how he operates, and because you have personal motivation to see him in the ground. Harding finished his whiskey. Plus, if things go sideways, you're expendable. No connection to any official investigation. His honesty was refreshing, if brutal. And if I refuse, then I arrest you now for the murder of Reese Dalton. Phillips may have arranged immunity for your gang activities, but Dalton's death wasn't covered in that agreement. A perfect trap. You mentioned my record being expunged. Complete pardon for all prior offenses. Signed by the territorial governor himself. And this. Harding removed an envelope from his jacket, handed it to me. Inside was a bank draft for $500 and a slip of paper with an address in San Francisco. What's this? The money's in advance. The address is where your sister has been living since the raid. My heart stopped, then raced. Mary's alive? In San Francisco? Harding nodded. Phillips arranged it. She works as a teacher's assistant at a girls' school. Doing well, by all accounts. I sat heavily on the room's single chair, legs suddenly unable to support me. Mary alive, safe, the hope I'd barely allowed myself to acknowledge, confirmed. How do I know you're telling the truth? In answer, Harding withdrew a small daguerreotype from his vest pocket, taken 3 months ago when one of our agents checked on her welfare. The image showed a young woman in a modest dress, hair arranged in a simple style, standing beside a rose bush. Despite the years and changes, I'd have known her anywhere. Mary, older, serene, unbroken by our shared ordeal. I swallowed hard, fighting unexpected emotion. She thinks I'm dead, doesn't she? She was told you died helping the marshals free her. Harding's voice softened slightly. Phillips thought it kinder than the truth, that you'd run. The accusation stung because it contained truth. I had run, left her behind, told myself it was for her protection, but never tried to find her afterward. Does she know about this arrangement you're proposing? Of course not, and she never will if things go as planned. Harding reclaimed the daguerreotype. You do this job, get your pardon, go to San Francisco if you want. Reunion's up to you. I stared at the bank draft in my hand. Blood money. Payment to become what I'd spent years avoiding, a killer for hire. But not just any killer. Cobb McLaren's killer. The man who destroyed everything I once had. "What's your plan?" I asked finally. Harding outlined the operation. Cobb's new gang was based in a remote cabin near Show Low, Arizona territory. They'd been hitting the Butterfield stage line between Holbrook and Fort Apache. I was to infiltrate, gain Cobb's trust, and eliminate him at the first opportunity. Once confirmed dead, I'd receive the rest of my payment and the promised pardon. "How do I prove he's dead?" I asked, thinking through practicalities. His right hand. Harding's expression didn't change. "He wears a distinctive silver ring with a black stone. Bring that." I suppressed a shudder. This was butcher's work, not justice. But then I'd abandoned notions of justice years ago. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow. My deputies will escort you to Holbrook. Establish your cover story there. After that, you're on your own." He held out his hand. "Do we have a deal, Morgan?" I looked at the offered hand, thought of Mary, of Cobb, of all the twisted paths that had led me to this moment. Then I shook, sealing my fate with a killer's grip. "We have a deal." The plan seemed simple enough. I would pose as a drifter who'd had some trouble with the law in Colorado, enough to make me uninterested in attracting official attention. Not so much that Cobb would consider me a liability. I'd hang around Holbrook, make it known I was looking for writing work of any kind, and wait for Cobb's recruiters to find me. Harding's deputies established my presence in town, spreading rumors of my gun handling skills, while simultaneously warning the local lawmen to give me a wide berth, part of a confidential territorial investigation. Within a week, I was the subject of whispered conversations at the town's 3 saloons. It took another week before I was approached. I was playing poker at the Trails End Saloon when a wiry man with a cavalry mustache took the empty seat beside me. "Hear you're handy with a gun," he remarked as I dealt a new hand. I shrugged. "Handy enough. Looking for work? Depends on the work." He introduced himself as Simmons, said he represented an outfit that could use a man with my particular talents. The pay was good, the job risky but rewarding. "Interested?" I feigned reluctance, asked pointed questions about the law. Simmons assured me their operation was well protected from official interference. Only after I'd made him work for it did I agree to meet his employer. The next morning, Simmons led me to a camp in the foothills east of town. 4 men lounged around a fire, their horses ground-hitched nearby. They watched our approach with the wary assessment of men accustomed to violence. And there was Cobb. He'd aged in the 6 years since I'd seen him last. The scar along his jaw was joined by others. A slash across his forehead, a puckered wound on his neck. His dark hair had gone mostly gray, but his eyes were unchanged, cold, calculating, cruel. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? Last time he'd seen me, I was a terrified 12-year-old boy. Now I stood before him, a full-grown man, bearded, trail-hardened, with eyes as dead as his own. "This is Morgan," Simmons announced, "the gunman I mentioned." Cobb looked me over, expression unreadable. "You killed men before, Morgan?" A simple question with a complicated answer. "When necessary." "And the law? We've had our disagreements. Nothing recent." That earned a cold smile. "Simmons says you're looking for writing work. What makes you think you'd fit with our outfit?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm fast, accurate, and I don't ask questions that don't concern me. I don't drink on the job, don't run my mouth afterward, and I've got no family to worry about if things get hot." Cobb glanced at the gun on my hip, a well-worn Remington .44 I'd chosen for its reliability rather than show. "Prove you're worth the risk." At his nod, one of the men by the fire stood and placed an empty whiskey bottle on a stump about 30 paces away. I drew and fired in one smooth motion. The bottle exploded into glittering shards. Without waiting for comment, I ejected the spent cartridge, reloaded, and holstered the Remington. Let them think what they would. Cobb's expression hadn't changed, but something in his posture did. A slight relaxation, an acknowledgement. "We're hitting the Fort Apache stage tomorrow at Beaver Creek Crossing. Payment is an equal share after expenses. You in?" "I'm in." Just like that, I was an outlaw again. Only this time, my crimes would have official sanction. The stage robbery went exactly as planned, which should have been my first warning. We took positions in the rocks above the crossing, covered our faces with bandanas, and when the stage appeared, fired enough warning shots to convince the driver to halt. No passengers that day, just a strong box containing the Indian agency payroll. $5,000 in government scrip and coin. No one hurt, no complications. Too easy. Back at their cabin hideout, a sturdy structure built into the side of a pine-covered hill, Cobb counted out the shares. 5 ways even, though I noticed he kept the strong box itself, which likely contained documents worth additional money to the right buyer. Over the next month, I rode with Cobb's gang on 3 more robberies, each successful, each seemingly without consequence. No posses pursued us. No lawmen patrolled the areas where we were known to operate. It was as if we had invisible protection, which according to Harding, we did. Cobb's political connections were shielding him, just as they had in Texas. I watched and waited, looking for the right opportunity to complete my mission. It wouldn't be easy. Cobb was careful, suspicious by nature. He slept lightly, never turned his back on anyone for long, and kept his personal space at the cabin off limits to the others. And there was another complication. The longer I rode with them, the more I remembered what it was to belong somewhere. Not that I harbored any illusions about these men being my friends. They were criminals, killers, men without conscience or code. But there's a certain camaraderie that develops among those who face danger together. A shorthand, a trust built on shared risk, if not shared values. I found myself laughing at their crude jokes, accepting drinks around the fire, sharing stories, carefully edited, of past exploits. Playing a role, I told myself, maintaining my cover. But a small voice whispered that it wasn't entirely an act. That part of me, the part shaped by years with the judge's gang, found this life familiar, even comfortable. A thought that kept me awake on my bedroll long after the others had succumbed to whiskey and exhaustion. My chance came unexpectedly, not at the cabin but during a supply run to a remote trading post. Cobb and I rode out alone, the others remaining behind to plan our next job. The trading post was a crude affair, just a log building with attached stable, run by a taciturn half-breed named Flacco, who asked no questions about his customers' business as long as their money was good. While Cobb negotiated for ammunition and provisions, I browsed the meager selection of goods, keeping one eye on my target. We were the only customers that afternoon. Flacco's nearest neighbor was 20 miles away. If ever there was a perfect opportunity, this was it. I stepped out to check on the horses, making sure mine was ready for a quick departure. Then I re-entered, hand casually near my gun. Cobb was leaning on the counter, counting out coins. His back was to me. Flacco was occupied recording the sale in a ledger. One shot, that's all it would take. Then cut off the hand with the ring, ride hard for Holbrook, collect my pardon and the rest of my payment. Simple. I drew the Remington, aimed at the center of Cobb's back. Finally worked up the nerve, eh? Cobb's voice froze me. He hadn't turned, was still counting coins as if discussing the weather. Don't know what you're talking about, I managed, gun still pointed at his back. Now he turned, showing no surprise or fear at the weapon aimed at his heart. Been wondering when you'd make your move, Morgan. Or should I say, Jedediah? Ice flooded my veins. You knew? A smile that never reached his eyes. Not at first, but your story had holes. Made me curious. And curious men ask questions. He tapped his temple. Got a good memory for faces. Even ones I saw briefly years ago. Took me a while to place you. The boy from that Texas ranch? My finger tightened on the trigger. Then you know why you're going to die. Maybe. He seemed remarkably unconcerned for a man with a gun aimed at him. But you might want to hear what happened to your sister first. Mary. The name stopped my breath. She's safe, away from all this. Cobb chuckled. Is she? Last reports put her teaching at some fancy girls' school in San Francisco, living under the name Mary Phillips. Very pretty girl. Grew up nice. Terror replaced the ice in my blood. How do you know that? Same way I knew you were coming. Friends in high places. His voice hardened. The marshals aren't the only ones who can make deals, boy. Put down the gun, or by sundown tomorrow, Your sister will disappear. Permanent. You're bluffing. But uncertainty crept in. How had he known my identity? Who had told him about Mary's whereabouts? Maybe, but you willing to risk it? He nodded at my gun. You pull that trigger. She's dead. Either way, I win. For a long moment, we were frozen in a tableau of mutual destruction. My gun aimed at his heart, his threat aimed at mine. In the corner, Flacco had wisely ducked behind the counter. Then something shifted in Cobb's expression. A calculation, a decision. Or there's a third option, he said, one where everybody lives. I'm listening. The gun didn't waver. Your marshal friends want me dead because I know things. Things about people in high offices. I've kept that knowledge as insurance. But I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, wondering which of my men is another Marshall plant. He nodded at me. You're not the first. What's your point? My point is, I'm ready to cash in my insurance. There's a bank in San Diego, safety deposit box with names, dates, bank transfers, enough to bring down half the territorial government. Understanding dawned. You want to make a deal. Smart boy. You help me disappear. New identity, passage to South America, and I give you the key to that box. Your Marshall friends get what they really want. I get a comfortable retirement, and everyone walks away breathing. Why should I trust you? Because I could have killed you a dozen times in the past month. Because I don't have a personal grudge against your sister. She's just leverage. And because I'm not offering this deal out of the goodness of my heart. His smile was razor thin. I'm offering it because it's my best play. I considered my options. Kill him now, risk Mary's life. Try to warn her, but how? By the time a telegram reached San Francisco, it might be too late. Or take the deal. Keep him alive long enough to verify his claims about the safety deposit box. Then decide. Slowly, I lowered the gun. How do we do this? Relief flickered across his face, quickly masked. We ride out now. Tell the boys we're scouting a new job. Head for Yuma, catch a steamer downriver to the Gulf. The others won't just let you walk away, which is why we leave now while they're expecting us back tomorrow. By the time they realize something's wrong, we'll be long gone. It was a desperate plan, built on mutual distrust. But I couldn't see a better alternative that didn't risk Mary. All right, I agreed. We leave now, but I'll be watching every move you make. Cobb's smile didn't reach his eyes. Likewise, boy. Likewise. We paid Flacco extra for his silence, resupplied our saddlebags, and rode southwest toward Yuma, each of us watching the other, waiting for the inevitable betrayal. Thus began the strangest journey of my life. 8 days in the constant company of the man I'd sworn to kill, the man who destroyed my family. We traveled difficult trails, avoiding settlements, making cold camps away from routes where we might be recognized. We spoke little during the days, focused on covering ground. At night, we took turns keeping watch, neither willing to sleep while the other was awake. On the third night, somewhere in the mountain wilderness west of Phoenix, I finally asked the question that had burned in me since I was 12. Why did you kill her? My mother. She was no threat to you. Cobb was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer, then staring into the small fire between us. I didn't. Reese did that, quick with that trigger when he got spooked. Your mom raised that shotgun. He shrugged. Wasn't part of the plan. We were just supposed to burn you out, send a message to your PA about certain business arrangements. Business arrangements? Your father wasn't just a rancher. He was poking into land deals around San Angelo, asking questions about water rights, railroad plans. The judge had interest in those matters. I digested this new information, this suggestion that Pa's past wasn't as straightforward as I'd believed. So you murdered our family over business. Welcome to the territories, boy. Everything's business. He poked the fire with a stick. For what it's worth, I told Reese to bring you both, you and your sister, unharmed. Wasn't my intention things went the way they did? That's supposed to make me feel better about watching my mother die? No, just telling you how it was. He looked up, his scarred face ghostly in the firelight. Life's rarely clean, Morgan. Good, evil, right, wrong. Those are Sunday school notions. Out here, there's just survival and who's willing to do what to whom. I wanted to argue. to defend some notion of justice or morality. But hadn't I proven his point? Here I was working for the very law I'd once fled, planning to kill for a pardon. What principle was I upholding? Get some sleep, I said instead. I'll take first watch. He nodded, settling onto his bedroll, gun within easy reach. She turned out all right, you know. Your sister. Saw her once in San Francisco from a distance. Looked happy. Clean life. The casual mention of his surveillance of Mary chilled me. That's supposed to make me hate you less? In the darkness, I heard what might have been a chuckle. No, but hate's a heavy thing to carry, boy. Wears on a man over time. I didn't respond, and eventually his breathing deepened into sleep. I watched the stars wheel overhead, thinking about hate, about justice, about the blurry lines between lawman and outlaw in a land where might regularly masqueraded as right. And I wondered what I would do when we reached Yuma. Yuma in August was hell's front porch, a sun-baked collection of adobe buildings and canvas tents clinging to the Colorado River like a dying man to his last canteen. We arrived at dusk, the heat still rising from the packed earth streets in shimmering waves. The plan was simple. Find passage downriver to the Gulf of California, then book transport to South America. Cobb had Mexican contacts in Guaymas who could provide new papers, new identities. He'd surrender the safety deposit box key to me before boarding the ship, ensuring his security. At least that was what he claimed. We took a room at the Territorial House, a two-story adobe structure that passed for the town's finest accommodation. Not out of luxury, but because it offered privacy in a defensible position, corner room, second floor, overlooking both the main street and the stable where we'd left our horses. Stay here, Cobb instructed after we'd settled in. I'll arrange our passage. Not a chance, I checked my Remington. We go together or not at all. He sighed, unsurprised. Fine, but let me do the talking. Rivermen are a suspicious lot, especially with strangers asking about quick, quiet transport. We found our man at the Riverfront Saloon, a grizzled steamboat pilot named Weber who supplemented his income by occasionally running contraband downriver under cover of darkness. For $50 in gold, he agreed to take us to Santa Isabela, a small Mexican port near the Gulf entrance, departing the following midnight. Seems too easy, I remarked as we walked back to the hotel. Cobb shrugged. Money talks, especially in places like Yuma. No one asks questions they don't want answers to. We were crossing the plaza when I spotted them. Two men in dusty trail clothes studying the announcements posted outside the marshal's office. Nothing remarkable about them except the way they stood, weight balanced on the balls of their feet, hands never far from their holstered weapons. Lawman's stance. I nudged Cobb, inclining my head slightly toward the pair. His eyes narrowed in recognition. Keep walking, he murmured. They haven't seen us yet. We continued at an unhurried pace, turning down a side street that would take us to the hotel by a less direct route. But as we rounded the corner, a voice called out, Luther Cobb, United States Marshals! Stop where you are! Cobb cursed, hand dropping to his gun. I grabbed his arm. Don't! Too many witnesses! He hesitated, then nodded fractionally. We turned to face the approaching marshals, hands carefully away from our weapons. The elder of the two, a grizzled man with a gray mustache and the hard eyes of someone who'd seen too much frontier justice, held his badge aloft. Luther Cobb, you're under arrest for stage robbery, murder, and conspiracy against the United States government. Cobb maintained a calm demeanor. You're mistaken, sir. Name's Johnson. Charles Johnson, cattle buyer from Tucson. The younger marshal snorted. Save it, Cobb. We've got witnesses place you at the Beaver Creek robbery last month. His gaze shifted to me. This your new running dog? I said nothing, mind racing. How had they found us? Harding had promised no official pursuit while I was working the job. Unless Harding had never expected me to succeed, unless I was merely bait, flushing Cobb from his sanctuary into open territory where official law could operate. The older marshal was studying me with increasing interest. Wait a minute, aren't you the fella Harding was? A shot cracked the evening air. The marshal's words ended in a grunt as he staggered, red blooming across his shirt front. More shots followed, seemingly from multiple directions. The younger marshal fell, clutching his thigh. Cobb and I dove for cover behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood around us. "Friends of yours," I shouted over the gunfire. Cobb drew his revolver, peering cautiously around the edge of the trough. "Not unless they've got terrible aim." He fired twice toward a doorway across the street. "Looks like Simmons and the boys caught up quicker than expected." The truth hit me like a physical blow. We were caught in a crossfire between Marshall's and Cobb's gang, neither of whom were likely to care whether I lived or died. "We need to get to the horses," I called, checking my own weapon. Cobb nodded grimly. "On three. I'll go high, you go low." He tensed, ready to spring. 1, 2. Before he could say 3, I made my decision. Survival, Cobb had said, was about who was willing to do what to whom, and in that moment my calculation was brutally simple. I stood, raising my hands. "Hold your fire! United States Marshal business!" Cobb looked up at me, momentary confusion giving way to understanding, and something like respect. "Well played, boy," he murmured. The firing paused. I kept my hands visible, calling out again. "I'm working with Marshal Harding. Territorial investigation. The man behind the trough is Luther Cobb." From across the street, a voice responded. "Identify yourself." "Morgan. Jedediah Morgan. Harding can verify." A tense moment of silence, then, "Throw out your weapon, Morgan. Slow and careful." I ejected the bullets from my Remington, then tossed it into the street. "Coming out now. Don't shoot." I stepped from behind the trough, hands high. Multiple guns trained on me from doorways and windows around the street. The area had cleared of civilians, leaving only armed men with murder in their eyes. A figure detached from a shadowed alley, another marshal, badge glinting in the fading light. "Where's Cobb?" I nodded toward the trough. "Armed, dangerous." The marshal raised his voice. "Luther Cobb, you're surrounded. Throw out your weapon and stand up slow." No response from behind the trough. "Cobb, last chance." When silence continued, the marshal signaled to his men. Two approached cautiously from different angles, guns trained on the trough. "He's gone," one called. Impossible. I'd been right there blocking the only visible escape route. Unless... I scanned the buildings behind us. There, a narrow gap between the mercantile and the adjacent storefront, barely visible in the gathering dusk. Cobb must have slipped away while all attention was on me. The marshal cursed, then turned to me. "You're the one working with Harding?" I nodded cautiously. "Infiltration operation. Been riding with Cobb's gang for over a month." He studied me skeptically, then jerked his head toward the injured marshals being tended by townspeople. "Getting our men shot wasn't part of any plan I heard about. Wasn't my doing. Looks like Cobb's gang followed us to Yuma." As if confirming my words, more gunfire erupted from the direction of the livery stable. The marshal barked orders, sending men to investigate. "Get inside," he told me, gesturing toward the marshal's office. "We'll sort this out once we've secured the area." I was escorted to a small, stifling room with barred windows and a heavy door. Not quite a cell, but close enough. They took my gun belt, boots, and the derringer from my ankle holster, then left me alone with my thoughts. Hours passed. Occasional bursts of gunfire punctuated the night, growing more distant, then ceasing altogether. I gathered the marshals were pursuing either Cobb or his gang, or both through the streets of Yuma. Near midnight, when we should have been boarding Weber's steamboat, the door opened. Marshal Harding himself entered, looking trail-worn and grim. "Morgan," he acknowledged, taking the room's only chair. "Quite a mess you've made." "Me?" Indignation flared. "Your men blew the operation. I had Cobb exactly where we wanted him, ready to hand over evidence against his political connections. Another day, maybe two, and I'd have delivered everything you wanted." Harding's expression didn't change. That wasn't the assignment. The assignment was to eliminate Cobb, which I would have done once I verified his claims about the safety deposit box. I leaned forward. "He has documentation, Harding. Names, dates, bank transfers. Everything you need to break the corruption you claim to care about." "Claimed he had documentation," Harding corrected. "Luther Cobb is a career criminal, an accomplished liar. He was playing you, Morgan. buying time until his gang could mount a rescue. He shook his head. I thought you were smarter than that. Doubt crept in. Had I been manipulated? Had Cobb's story about the safety deposit box been just another con? Why did your men move in Yuma? I demanded. You promised me time to complete the job my way. Something flashed in Harding's eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or calculation. Plans change. We received intelligence that Cobb was heading for Mexico, planning to disappear. Couldn't risk losing him across the border, so you used me as bait. He didn't deny it. The operation adapted to circumstances. And now, thanks to your warning shout, Cobb has slipped away again. 2 marshals injured, 1 of Cobb's men dead, 3 civilians caught in the crossfire. Guilt twisted in my gut. Those civilians were on my conscience as surely as if I'd shot them myself. What happens now? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Now? Harding stood, straightening his vest. Now you're in a difficult position, Morgan. The pardon was contingent on Cobb's elimination. Mission failed. That's not fair! Your men interfered before I could complete the job. Life's rarely fair. He used Cobb's words so precisely I wondered if he'd been close enough to overhear our fireside conversation. But I'm not unreasonable. Cobb is still in the area. Wounded, according to reports. You find him, finish the job, bring me proof, and the original agreement stands. And if I refuse? Harding's smile was cold. Then you're just another wanted man. The charges for Reese Dalton's murder are still valid. Plus, now we could add aiding a fugitive, interfering with a federal investigation. He spread his hands. Your choice. Some choice. What about my sister? Cobb knew where she was, who she was living as. He had people watching her. Likely another lie, but as a precaution, we've sent a man to San Francisco. She'll be moved to a secure location until this matter is resolved. Provided I resolved it the way Harding wanted, the unspoken threat was clear. How long do I have? 48 hours. After that, we'll assume you've chosen the fugitive path. He moved to the door. Your gear will be returned. You can leave through the back once it's light. I suggest you start at the river. Last reports had Cobb heading that direction. After he left, I sat in the stifling room, weighing impossible choices. Hunt down and kill a wounded man to secure my freedom and Mary's safety, or refuse, become a fugitive again, with no guarantee I could reach or protect Mary before Cobb's people did. Some choice indeed, and at dawn I retrieved my weapons and gear and slipped out the back of the marshal's office. Yuma was quiet, the excitement of the previous night's gun battle replaced by the usual early morning routine of a frontier town. Shopkeepers swept boardwalks, deliverymen unloaded supplies, early risers queued at the cantina for coffee and breakfast. I headed for the river, as Harding had suggested. The Colorado flowed muddy and swift, its banks lined with makeshift docks and moorings for the various craft that worked the waterway. Weber's steamboat was gone, departed on schedule perhaps, but without its contracted passengers. I spent the morning questioning river folk, deckhands, fishermen, ferrymen. Most claimed to have seen nothing unusual the previous night. A few mentioned gunfire in town, but none admitted witnessing a wounded man fleeing toward the water. It was midday when I found my first real lead. A young Mexican boy selling fresh fish described seeing a gringo with a face like broken pottery, limping along the bank just before dawn, heading south. He bleed here, the boy said, pointing to his side. Ask for boat, but no one help. He cursed, then walked that way. He pointed downstream toward the territorial border. I gave the boy a silver dollar for his information and set out on foot, following the riverbank. The August sun beat down mercilessly, the temperature climbing well past 100 degrees. Sweat soaked my shirt within minutes and dust caked my throat. 2 miles outside town, I spotted the tracks. A single set of boot prints leading away from the water into a dense mesquite thicket. The prints were uneven, suggesting their maker favored one leg. Occasionally, dark spots stained the sand. Blood. I drew my Remington and followed cautiously. The thicket gave way to a small clearing where an abandoned prospector's shack leaned precariously, its roof half collapsed. The boot prints led directly to the sagging door. Circling the structure, I confirmed that there was only one entrance. Two glassless windows offered additional points of access, but both were partly blocked by the shack's deteriorating walls. "Cobb," I called from a safe distance. "It's Morgan!" Silence. "I know you're in there. I'm alone!" After a long pause, a voice rasped from within. "Prove it. If I weren't alone, you'd already be dead or in irons." A harsh laugh. "Fair point. Come in then." Slowly. I approached the door, Remington ready. Pushing it open with my foot, I peered into the dimness. Cobb sat propped against the far wall, legs extended before him. His shirt was dark with blood from a wound in his left side. His gun hand rested limply in his lap, the revolver beside him rather than in it. His face was ashen beneath his tan, eyes fever bright. "You look like hell," I observed, keeping my distance. "Feel worse." He gestured weakly at his side. "Your marshal friends are decent shots. Got me clean through the liver, I reckon." I assessed the wound from where I stood. The bleeding had slowed, but the skin around the entry wound was an angry red, suggesting infection had already set in. "You need a doctor." "Need a miracle, more like." He coughed, wincing at the movement. "But I'll settle for water if you got any." I hesitated, then tossed him my canteen. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin. "Why'd you do it, Morgan?" he asked when he'd finished. Was it the pardon they promised? Or just old-fashioned revenge? "Both," I admitted, seeing no point in lies. "But mostly for my sister's safety." He nodded weakly. "Family. Always a man's vulnerable point." He gestured at my gun. "Well, finish what you came for." "I'm unlikely to put up much resistance in this state." I studied him, this man who'd been the boogeyman of my childhood nightmares, now reduced to a bleeding, dying figure in a forgotten shack. Killing him now would feel less like justice and more like putting down a wounded animal. "The safety deposit box," I said instead. "Was that real or just a ploy to buy time?" A faint smile. "Real enough. Keys in my left boot, small pocket sewn into the lining." I approached cautiously, still not trusting him despite his obvious weakness. But when I reached for his boot, he made no move to stop me. The key was where he'd said, a small brass item with the number 127 stamped on its head. "San Diego First National," Cobb murmured. "You'll need proper papers to access it. Inside front pocket of my vest." I found those too. A folded document identifying him as Charles Winston with a bank signature card. "Will these work with my face instead of yours?" He shrugged, the movement clearly painful. "Bankers half blind. Just sign the same way. Wear a suit, talk proper." I tucked the papers and key into my shirt pocket, then stepped back, gun still trained on him. "What's really in that box, Cobb?" Exactly what I said. Documents, proof of who was really running things in the territories. The judge wasn't just some outlaw king. He had judges, politicians, even a territorial governor in his pocket. His breathing grew more labored. "Insurance policy. Kept me alive this long. Why give it up now?" His eyes, fever bright, fixed on mine. Man comes to a point where surviving starts to seem less important than how he's remembered. Maybe I'm getting sentimental in my old age. I recognized the lie for what it was. Cobb wasn't sentimental. If he was surrendering his insurance policy, it was because he knew he wouldn't need it much longer. "You're dying," I stated flatly. "Been dying since that marshal's bullet. Just a question of how and where." He closed his eyes briefly. "Prefer it be quick, if you're offering." I raised the Remington, aimed at his heart. One shot, clean, quick. Exactly what I'd planned all along, what Harding expected. What would secure the pardon, Mary's safety, my future? Cobb watched me, a strange calm settling over his features. "You know what's funny, Morgan? In another life, you might have been me. Got the same coldness inside, same ability to do what needs doing, regardless of cost." His lip curled in a bloody approximation of a smile. "The judge saw it. That's why he kept you close." My finger tightened on the trigger. "I'm nothing like you." "Keep telling yourself that, boy, but we both know what you are." His eyes held mine, challenging. "Pull the trigger. Prove me right." In that moment, everything crystallized. I saw with perfect clarity the path I was on, a path that led inexorably to becoming the very thing I hated. Each compromise, each justification bringing me closer to being a Cobb or a judge or even a Harding. Men who used others as tools, who killed for convenience disguised as justice. I lowered the gun. "No," I said quietly, "I won't prove you right." Confusion replaced the challenge in his eyes. "What are you playing at?" "I'm not playing." I holstered the Remington. "You're already dying. I won't hurry you along just to ease my conscience or please Harding." "You're a fool. They'll never give you that pardon without proof I'm dead." I shrugged. "Maybe, but I'll take my chances with the contents of that safety deposit box. Seems to me the documents inside might be worth more than a pardon in the right hands." Understanding dawned on his pain-creased face. Leverage. Something like that. Harding wants Cobb dead, but his superiors might prefer the evidence against corrupt officials. Evidence I now control. Cobb laughed, the sound turning into a wet cough. "You've learned well, Morgan. Almost makes me proud." "I don't want your pride." I turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I believe you about not ordering my mother's death. Doesn't make us square, but I don't need to be the one who sends you to meet her." He nodded weakly. "Fair enough. We each answer for our own sins in the end." At the door, I looked back one last time. "I'll send someone. For the body. Don't bother. Coyotes need to eat too." I left him there sitting against the wall of that forgotten shack, already more ghost than man. By sundown, I guessed, Luther Cobb would be nothing but memory and legend, and I would be neither executioner nor savior, but something more complicated in between. Part 3. The Unmaking of a Legend. The San Diego First National Bank stood as a testament to Eastern prosperity transplanted to the Western frontier. A 3-story stone edifice with polished brass fixtures and marble floors, entirely out of place among the dusty, sun-baked buildings surrounding it. I felt equally out of place in my newly purchased suit and string tie, hair slicked back, beard trimmed to respectability. The elderly banker barely glanced at the papers identifying me as Charles Winston. He was more interested in the brass key with its stamped number. "Haven't seen you in quite some time, Mr. Winston," he remarked as he led me to the vault. "Business keeping you away from our fair city?" "Something like that," I murmured, adopting what I hoped was a wealthy man's disinterest in small talk with service personnel. The safety deposit box was smaller than I'd expected, just large enough to hold a bundle of papers tied with twine and a small leather pouch. The banker discreetly withdrew, leaving me alone in a private viewing room to examine the contents. The papers proved to be exactly what Cobb had claimed: documentation of a vast conspiracy of corruption reaching from local law enforcement up to the territorial governor's office. Bank transfers, signed agreements, coded correspondence, all meticulously organized and annotated in a precise hand I recognized from the judge's ledgers at the mission. The leather pouch contained something else entirely. Gold coin, about $100 worth. Getaway money, I supposed. Cobb's final escape plan. I returned everything to the box except a select few documents that implicated Marshal Benjamin Harding in a scheme to allow certain robberies to proceed unhindered in exchange for a percentage of the take. These I carefully folded and placed in my inside jacket pocket. My next stop was the telegraph office, where I sent 2 messages. The first, addressed to Marshal Harding in Yuma. Cobb deceased. Stop proof secured. Stop require pardon papers and remainder of payment at Imperial Hotel San Diego. Stop arriving tomorrow. Stop Morgan. The second, to Mary Phillips at the Fairview School for Girls in San Francisco. Mary, stop, friend of family. Stop, have information about your brother. Stop, will call at school Wednesday afternoon. Stop, James Watson. Then I checked into the Imperial Hotel, ordered a bath and a steak dinner, and waited. Harding arrived the following evening, dusty from the trail, but otherwise impeccable in his marshal's attire. He found me in the hotel dining room, nursing a whiskey and watching the door. "Morgan," he acknowledged, taking the chair across from me. "You're looking prosperous. Amazing what a hot bath and clean clothes can do." I signaled the waiter for another glass. "Successful hunt." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You tell me. Your telegram said Cobb is dead." He is. I sipped my whiskey. Or was when I left him. Gut shot, infection setting in. Nature would have finished him within a day if the coyotes didn't get him first. And the proof I requested? I reached into my pocket, withdrew the silver ring with its black stone that I'd taken from Cobb's lifeless hand. This at least was no lie. After our conversation, I'd waited outside the shack until the sounds of labored breathing stopped, then returned to find him exactly as predicted. Dead, eyes fixed on the sagging ceiling. Harding examined the ring, nodding in satisfaction. This is it. Where's the body? Couldn't transport it in this heat. Left it where it fell, about 2 miles south of Yuma along the river. You'll find a prospector's shack in a mesquite thicket. He pocketed the ring. I'll send men to verify, of course. Of course. I finished my whiskey. And my payment? The pardon? Harding withdrew an envelope from his jacket. $500, as agreed. The pardon is being processed. Should be delivered to you within a month. I didn't reach for the envelope. That wasn't our agreement. Full payment and pardon on delivery of proof. The ring is proof. The pardon requires the governor's signature. These things take time. And I'm just supposed to trust you'll follow through after you change plans on me in Yuma without warning? His expression hardened. You fulfilled your primary objective, Morgan. Cobb is dead. Be satisfied with that and the money. The pardon will come when it comes. I lean back studying him. And if it doesn't, if instead I find myself arrested for Reese Dalton's murder as soon as I let my guard down. That would be unfortunate. His tone suggested it would be unfortunate primarily for me, but unlikely provided you maintain a low profile and avoid causing trouble. Meaning stay quiet about certain other matters. His eyes narrowed further. What other matters? I reached into my jacket's inner pocket, withdrew one of Cobb's documents, a bank draft showing a transfer from BH to the judge's account following a particularly lucrative stage robbery. Interesting reading material Cobb was carrying, I remarked casually. Seems he kept detailed records of all his business arrangements, including those with law enforcement. The color drained from Harding's face. Where did you get that? Does it matter? There's more where this came from. Much more. I returned the paper to my pocket. Names, dates, amounts. Enough to interest a federal prosecutor, I'd imagine, or a newspaper editor. His hand moved toward his gun. I wouldn't, I advised. The documents are secured. If anything happens to me, they go public. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the table, the noise of the dining room fading to a distant hum. I had just made an enemy more dangerous than any outlaw, a corrupt lawman with a badge, resources, and a personal grudge. Finally, Harding's hand moved away from his weapon. What do you want? Exactly what we agreed to. Full payment now. Pardon delivered to me, personally, within 1 week, and confirmation that my sister remains safe and unmolested in San Francisco. And the documents? Insurance. Against any future misunderstandings between us. His jaw tightened. You're playing a dangerous game, Morgan. No game, just ensuring we all get what we want. I held his gaze. You get Cobb's death, closure on several open cases. I get my freedom and my sister's safety. The documents stay buried unless you force my hand. And what's to stop me from finding these documents once you have your pardon? Geography, I replied simply. Once pardoned, I'll be leaving the territories. For good. You'll never find me or the documents unless I want to be found. He considered this, calculation evident in his cold eyes. Finally, he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a thicker envelope than the first. The agreed-upon $1,000, all of it. He placed it on the table. You'll have your pardon within the week, delivered to whatever address you specify. The Imperial Hotel will do for now. I picked up the envelope, confirming its contents with a quick glance. And my sister? Untouched. We verified her safety just yesterday. His voice lowered. But understand this, Morgan. If those documents ever surface, pardon or no pardon, I will find you. And what happened to Cobb will seem merciful by comparison. I nodded, accepting the threat as genuine. Then let's hope we never have reason to meet again. He stood, adjusting his hat. For your sake. With that, he departed, back rigid with controlled fury. I ordered another whiskey, considering what I'd just done. I had secured my freedom and Mary's safety, yes, but I'd also made a powerful enemy and committed myself to a life of looking over my shoulder. The very thing Cobb had grown weary of. Still, it was better than the alternative, becoming Harding's personal assassin, killing on command for promises that might never be kept. At least this way, I controlled my own fate. The next morning, I boarded the coastal steamer bound for San Francisco, Cobb's gold coins and Harding's payment secure in a money belt beneath my new clothes. The documents were divided between my personal luggage and a separate package mailed to myself at the San Francisco Central Post Office. Insurance against loss or theft. 3 days later, I stood outside the Fairview School for Girls, a Victorian mansion on Nob Hill converted to educational purposes. My suit was pressed, my hat new, my appearance respectable enough that the matron at the door directed me to a small reception parlor without suspicion. "Mr. Watson to see Miss Phillips," she informed the younger woman who came to greet me, "regarding family business." Mary entered moments later. 6 years had passed since I'd seen her last, the frightened girl replaced by a composed young woman in a modest blue dress, her auburn hair swept up in the current fashion. She showed no recognition, just polite inquiry as she extended her hand. "Mr. Watson, I'm Mary Phillips. You wish to see me?" I took her hand, searching her face. "Yes, Miss Phillips, though you knew me by another name once." "Jetty." She froze, color draining from her face. Her hand trembled in mine. "It's not possible," she whispered. "They told me you were dead." "Not dead," I said gently. "Just lost for a while." She swayed slightly and I guided her to a chair. The matron looked concerned, but Mary waved her away with a murmured assurance she was fine, just surprised. When we were alone, she stared at me as if memorizing every feature. "Jedediah, is it really you?" I nodded, throat suddenly tight. "It's me, Mary. I'm sorry it took so long." Her hand reached out hesitantly, touched my face as if to verify I was solid, real. Then she was in my arms, her tears soaking my jacket, her body shaking with silent sobs. "They said you died helping the marshals," she managed when she could speak again. "Said you were a hero." I held her tightly, unwilling to let go now that I'd found her again. "Not a hero, Mary, just a survivor. Like you." She pulled back slightly, studying my face. "What happened? After they took us?" So I told her. Not everything. She didn't need to know the worst of it, but enough of the truth that she would understand why I'd been absent so long, why I couldn't come for her sooner. I told her about the judge, about Phillips, about the years at the mission, about my escape and the long journey that had finally led me to her doorstep. She listened without interruption, hands clasped tightly in her lap. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "And now?" she asked finally. "What happens now?" "That depends partly on you," I said carefully. "I've secured a pardon for my past activities, have some money saved, enough to start fresh somewhere far from here. San Francisco, Boston, even Europe if you fancy it." I hesitated. "I'd like you to come with me, if you want to, but I understand if you've built a life here, you don't wish to leave." Mary looked around the tasteful parlor, then back at me. "This has been a safe harbor, but never home. I've been Mary Phillips because I had to be, but I've never forgotten I was born Mary Morgan." She smiled, a hint of the little sister I remembered shining through. "Of course I'll come with you, Jetty. We're family, the only family either of us has left." Relief washed through me. "We'll leave as soon as my pardon arrives. A week at most. I'll make arrangements. Find us passage east." "East?" She looked surprised. "I thought you preferred open country." "I did, once, but I've had my fill of dust and danger." I smiled ruefully. "Thought we might try civilization for a change." We talked for another hour, making plans, sharing carefully edited versions of our lives apart. Mary had flourished at the school, becoming a teacher's assistant with hopes of eventually running her own classroom. She'd made friends, learned social graces that had been impossible in our frontier upbringing. But she'd never forgotten the ranch, our parents, or me. As I prepared to leave, promising to return once the pardon arrived, she clasped my hand tightly. Tell me truly, Jedediah, are you in danger still? Should I be worried? I considered lying, offering false reassurance, but we'd had enough lies between us. There might be trouble eventually, a man I crossed who won't forget easily, but I've taken precautions, and where we're going, he'll have no authority. She nodded, accepting this. Then we'll face it together, if it comes. No more separations. No more separations, I agreed, and meant it with every fiber of my being. The pardon arrived 5 days later, delivered by a junior marshal who seemed unaware of its significance. The document was ornate, official, bearing the territorial governor's florid signature and several impressive seals. It enumerated my crimes: association with the McLaren-Whitaker gang, participation in various robberies, the killing of Reese Dalton, and formally absolved me of legal responsibility for all. With that paper and the money secured in my belt, I collected Mary from the school. We boarded a steamer bound for Panama, where we would cross the isthmus and catch another ship to New Orleans. From there, we planned to travel to Boston, where neither the name Morgan nor the face of Jedediah would mean anything to anyone. As California receded behind us, Mary stood at the rail beside me, watching the coastline fade into evening mist. "Do you think we'll ever come back?" she asked. I thought of Harding, of his threat, of the documents hidden away that were both our protection and our vulnerability. "Not in this lifetime," I replied honestly. "Too many ghosts." She nodded, understanding more than I'd told her. "Then we'll make new memories elsewhere." "Yes," I agreed, putting my arm around her shoulders. "New memories, new lives." And for a time, that's exactly what we did. Boston in the 1880s was a city of contradictions. Old world formality alongside new world ambition, industrial grime coexisting with Brahmin elegance, immigrant struggles beneath the shadow of established wealth. For two transplanted Texans with dark pasts and assumed names, it offered perfect anonymity. We became James and Mary Watson, distant cousins who'd inherited a modest sum from a California relative. We purchased a small but respectable townhouse in the South End, furnished it simply but well, and set about constructing the appearance of ordinary lives. Mary secured a position at a girls' academy similar to the one she'd left behind, her references from Fairview opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Her natural gentleness and patience made her a favorite with students and parents alike. I, having no formal education but a quick mind and funds to invest, established a modest importing business. Nothing flashy or overly ambitious, just reliable trade in textiles and dry goods from New York and Philadelphia. The business provided a respectable income and, more importantly, a plausible explanation for occasional travel. Those first years in Boston were peaceful, almost dreamlike in their normalcy. We attended concerts, joined a small Methodist congregation, developed acquaintances who gradually became friends. Mary even had suitors, respectable young men from good families, who sent flowers and called on Sunday afternoons. For myself, I remained unattached. Not from lack of opportunity. Boston had no shortage of eligible women seeking business-owning husbands, but from a deep-seated wariness I couldn't quite shake. The man I'd been, the things I'd done created a gulf between myself and these genteel Easterners that no amount of tailored suits or practiced manners could bridge. Besides, I had responsibilities. Mary's safety remained my primary concern, which meant vigilance against threats from the past. Every 6 months, under the guise of business trips, I would travel to different cities, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and check for signs of pursuit. I maintained a network of paid informants, hotel clerks, telegraph operators, railroad conductors, who would alert me if anyone matching Harding's description or making inquiries about the Morgans passed through their territory. For 5 years, there was nothing. No whispers, no sightings, no telegrams requesting urgent meetings. Gradually, I allowed myself to believe we might truly have escaped, that the documents I kept secured in a bank vault under yet another false name were insurance I would never need to use. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday in April 1888, nearly 6 years after our arrival in Boston. Plain envelope, no return address, postmarked San Francisco. Inside a single sheet of paper with a brief message. "He's found you. Coming east. Burn this." No signature, but I recognized the handwriting. Doña Elena, the Mexican woman who'd nursed me back to health after my escape from the mission. I'd sent her money over the years, along with a contact address for emergencies only. This apparently qualified. I destroyed the letter as instructed, then began preparations. Our emergency plan, established years earlier but never implemented, was simple. Mary would go north to a small coastal town in Maine, where we'd purchased a modest cottage under a third identity. I would handle whatever threat presented itself, then join her or send word if alternative arrangements became necessary. Mary predictably objected. We promised to face things together, she reminded me as I explained the situation over breakfast. No more separations. This is different, I insisted. Harding isn't just another outlaw. He's a federal marshal with resources and authority, and he bears me a personal grudge. All the more reason I shouldn't leave you to face him alone. I shook my head. If he finds us both, he has leverage. If he finds only me, I maintain the advantage. She knew I was right, but still hesitated. How long should I wait in Maine? What if you don't come? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. What if, indeed? 3 months, I decided. If you haven't heard from me by then, assume I won't be coming. The cottage deed is in the strong box, along with enough money to live comfortably for years. Use it to go wherever you please. Europe, perhaps. Always wanted to see Paris, didn't you? Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she nodded. My practical, brave Mary. When do I leave? Today. Pack only what you need, nothing that might identify you as Mary Watson of Boston. I squeezed her hand. It's just a precaution. Likely I'll join you within weeks, and we'll laugh about this over Maine lobster. She didn't believe the reassurance any more than I did, but she played along with the fiction, as we'd both become accustomed to doing over the years. By noon she was gone, traveling north by train under the name Margaret Williams, a widow visiting relatives. I returned to the townhouse, made visible preparations for a business trip to New York, then doubled back through a service entrance and settled in to wait. Harding arrived 3 days later, not in person but by proxy. 2 men who watched the house from across the street, taking turns, never approaching. Professional surveillance, not local talent. They maintained their vigil for 5 days, presumably confirming that Mary was absent and noting my apparent departure for New York. On the 6th night, as I'd anticipated, they made their move. I watched from the darkened study as they picked the lock on the service entrance. Quietly, efficiently. The work of men who'd done this before. They entered cautiously, one covering while the other advanced, searching the lower floor room by room. When they reached the study, I was waiting, seated in the leather armchair, Remington resting on my lap, oil lamp turned low. Gentlemen, I greeted them calmly, I believe you're looking for me. The lead man, tall, raw bone with a face like carved granite, froze momentarily, then relaxed his stance slightly. Mr. Morgan? Or is it Watson now? Watson will do. And you are. Names aren't important. He remained in the doorway, his companion positioned behind him. Neither had drawn weapons, but their readiness was apparent in their posture. We're here with a message from Marshal Harding. I assumed as much. And the message? He wants the documents, all of them. No copies, no exceptions. The man's voice was flat, professional. In exchange, you and your sister remain undisturbed. I nodded, unsurprised. And if I decline? Then our instructions change from delivery to retrieval. By any means necessary. His eyes flicked meaningfully to my gun. Though that iron won't help you much. We're not alone. A bluff, possibly, but I couldn't risk it. Not here. Not with civilian neighbors who could become collateral damage. I don't have the documents here, I said truthfully. They're secured elsewhere. We'll escort you to retrieve them. I shook my head. Not possible. The arrangement requires personal appearance during banking hours, identification verification, that sort of thing. Nothing that can be accomplished at gunpoint in the middle of the night. The man considered this, then nodded slightly. Tomorrow morning, then, 9 o'clock, we'll accompany you to wherever they're held. And afterward? What guarantee do I have that Harding will honor his end of the bargain? A thin smile. You'll be permitted to leave Boston Take the morning train to New York, then wherever you please. The marshal's interest ends with the documents. And my sister remains undisturbed, provided you cooperate fully. I pretended to consider the offer, though in truth my decision was already made. The documents were my only leverage against Harding. Without them, Mary and I would spend our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the day he decided we were loose ends that needed tying off. Very well, I agreed finally. 9 o'clock. But I go alone to the bank. You can watch from across the street. Follow me after if you wish. But I won't have armed men accompanying me into a reputable financial institution. The man hesitated, then nodded. Acceptable. But understand this, Morgan. If you attempt to flee or alert authorities, your sister's cottage in Maine will receive visitors before nightfall. Ice formed in my veins. They knew about Maine, about the cottage, which meant that they'd been watching us longer than I'd realized, had likely followed Mary's journey north. The advantage I thought I'd secured by sending her away was illusory. I understand, I said, keeping my voice level despite the surge of fear. 9 o'clock. They departed as they'd come, silently, professionally, leaving no trace of their intrusion except my shaken confidence and the new knowledge that our carefully constructed safety net had already frayed beyond repair. Once alone, I moved quickly. The real documents were indeed in a bank vault, but not in Boston. I'd secured them in New York under yet another alias, with access protocols too complex to be circumvented by force or threat. What I kept in Boston was a dummy set, convincing enough to pass casual inspection, but lacking the most damning evidence against Harding specifically. I retrieved this set from its hiding place behind a loose brick in the study fireplace, then made further preparations for the morning's encounter. Sleep was impossible, my mind racing through scenarios, contingencies, escape routes. By dawn, I had a plan. Not a good one, perhaps, but the best available given the circumstances. At precisely 9 o'clock, I exited the townhouse, dummy documents secured in a leather portfolio under my arm. As expected, my visitors from the previous night were waiting, one across the street, seemingly absorbed in a newspaper, the other lounging against a lamppost half a block away. Neither approached, but both fell into step behind me as I walked toward the commercial district. The Boston Mercantile Bank was a solid, imposing structure designed to inspire confidence in its stability. I entered, nodded to the guard, and approached a teller. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "I need to access my safety deposit box." The transaction proceeded normally. I was escorted to the vault, left alone with the box as was custom. Inside, I placed the dummy documents, rearranged them to appear well used, then closed the box and signaled I was finished. Back in the lobby, I spotted my shadows through the front windows, still waiting, still watching. I approached the bank manager's desk. "Mr. Hargrove," I greeted him with a confidence I didn't feel. "Might I have a moment of your time? A personal matter." Hargrove, a portly man with impressive whiskers and the perpetually worried expression of someone responsible for other people's money, gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Of course, Mr. Watson. How may I assist you?" I glanced meaningfully at the front windows, lowered my voice. "I find myself in a delicate situation. The men outside, the one with the newspaper and the one by the lamppost, have been following me. I believe their intentions are criminal." Hargrove's bushy eyebrows rose in alarm. "Criminal? Are you certain? Should I summon the police?" "Not yet," I cautioned. "I have no proof, just suspicion based on previous encounters with men of their description. But I would appreciate the bank's assistance in testing my theory." "How so?" I outlined my request, simple enough, but requiring the bank's cooperation. Hargrove, after initial hesitation, agreed. Whether from concern for a valued customer or simple curiosity, I couldn't say. But within minutes, the necessary arrangements were made. I left the bank through the front entrance, portfolio under my arm, and began walking north toward the commercial district. My shadows followed at a discreet distance, likely assuming the portfolio now contained the documents they sought. 2 blocks from the bank, I entered Blackstone and Sons, a large department store with multiple exits. I moved purposefully through the ground floor, up the central staircase to the mezzanine, then back down via a side stairwell that led to the delivery entrance. There, as arranged, a bank messenger waited with a horse-drawn cab. its driver instructed to proceed directly to North Station, regardless of any attempts to stop it. I pressed a gold coin into the messenger's hand, took his place in the cab, and we were off, clattering through the delivery alley onto a side street before my pursuers could realize what had happened. By the time they understood the deception, I was boarding the 9:45 express to New York, first-class ticket in hand, and they were left with an empty portfolio delivered to them by a confused bank messenger who'd been told only to hand it to the gentleman with the newspaper or his companion. A small victory, but significant. It bought me time, distance, and most importantly, maintained my possession of the actual documents, the only true leverage I had against Harding. From New York, I telegraphed Mary at our prearranged contact point in Maine. Business complicated stop returning to California. Stop meet where wildflowers grow. Stop J. She would understand. Our contingency plan if Boston became untenable involved returning west. Not to San Francisco, but to a small town on the Oregon coast where we'd established yet another identity and purchased a modest property using a third bank account. Where wildflowers grow was our code for this location. Then I boarded a westbound train, beginning the long journey back across a continent we'd traversed in the opposite direction 6 years earlier. As the eastern seaboard receded behind me, I considered the irony, how the territories I'd been so eager to escape were now my destination of choice. Perhaps because, despite their dangers, I understood their rules in ways I never fully grasped the complexities of Boston society. In the West, threats were often direct, physical. In the East, they came wrapped in respectability and legal paperwork, no less deadly but harder to defend against. The journey took 2 weeks. I changed trains frequently, altered my appearance, used different names for each leg. I watched for followers, for telegrams being received at stations where I disembarked, for the 1,000 small signs that might indicate pursuit. By the time I reached Portland, Oregon, I was reasonably confident I'd shed any immediate tail. From there, I traveled south by coastal steamer to the small fishing village where our emergency property waited, a simple cottage overlooking the Pacific, purchased years earlier through a San Francisco attorney who believed he was representing an eccentric widow with health concerns requiring sea air. Mary arrived a week later, having taken an equally circuitous route west. Our reunion was joyful, but tempered by the reality of our situation. We were fugitives again, despite the pardon, despite the years of careful living. Harding's reach had proven longer than I'd anticipated, his patience greater, his resources more extensive. "What now?" Mary asked as we sat on the cottage's small porch, watching the endless assault of Pacific waves against the rocky shore below. "Do we just keep running?" I had been considering this question throughout my journey west. Not running, hiding in plain sight perhaps, but differently this time. How so? We've been trying to become other people, respectable Easterners with no connection to our past. But that requires constant vigilance, constant performance. I gestured toward the wild coastline. Out here, people are less concerned with who you were than what you can do. Less paperwork, fewer questions, more space between neighbors. She considered this. "You're suggesting we stop trying to be the Watsons and just be ourselves?" "Something like that. Not Morgans again. That name still carries risk. But people who don't need to pretend quite so hard." I took her hand. "The documents will keep Harding at bay for now. He knows I'll release them if anything happens to either of us. But long term, we need a more permanent solution." "What kind of solution?" I hesitated, the plan I'd been formulating still half-formed. "I need to neutralize Harding as a threat, not by killing him. That would just bring more attention. But by ensuring he has no authority or credibility to use against us." "And how do you propose to do that?" "By using the documents, but carefully, selectively. Not a public exposure that would bring the full weight of the law down immediately, but targeted disclosures to the right people. Create enough suspicion and internal investigation that Harding becomes too busy defending himself to pursue us." Mary frowned. "That sounds dangerous and complicated." "It is, which is why I need to handle it. Alone." Her expression hardened. "Jedediah, not a separation," I clarified quickly, "just a division of labor. You'll establish us here, create our local presence, make the necessary connections. I'll take care of Harding. 2 months at most." She clearly disliked the plan, but recognized its necessity. 2 months. Then what? Then we live, Mary. Simply, quietly, on our own terms. No more running, no more looking over our shoulders. I squeezed her hand. That's the promise I made when I found you in San Francisco, and I intend to keep it. She studied me, perhaps seeing the determination beneath my reassuring smile. Finally, she nodded. 2 months. But if you're not back by midsummer, I'm coming after you. I chuckled, recognizing this was not an idle threat. My sister had grown from the frightened girl of our captivity into a formidable woman, resourceful and resolute. Deal, I agreed. Though God help Harding if you do, he'd probably prefer to face me. Her answering smile was both sweet and steel-edged. Probably. 2 days later, I departed for San Francisco, the first stop in my campaign against Marshal Benjamin Harding. The documents I carried represented 6 years of the judge's operations, including names, dates, amounts, and most crucially, participants in various criminal enterprises that had been permitted to operate under official protection. Harding featured prominently in these records, but he wasn't the highest-ranking official implicated. That distinction belonged to former territorial governor Lawrence Chambers, who had left office under a cloud of financial impropriety, but had never faced formal charges. Now a powerful businessman with political ambitions, Chambers had every reason to ensure certain documents never came to light. My plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Approach Chambers privately, demonstrate what I possessed, and offer a trade, his assistance in neutralizing Harding in exchange for the destruction of documents implicating Chambers himself. Finding Chambers proved easier than expected. He maintained a prominent presence in San Francisco society, his name regularly appearing in newspaper accounts of civic functions, business openings, and political gatherings. I traced him to an imposing mansion on Nob Hill, then observed his daily routines for 3 days before making my approach. The opportunity came at his private club, an exclusive establishment near Union Square where he dined each Thursday. I entered not through the front door, where membership was required, but through the kitchen, dressed as a waiter and carrying a silver tray with a folded note. The maitre d' intercepted me as I emerged into the dining room. "You, new boy, where are you going?" "Message for Mr. Chambers, sir," I replied deferentially. "Delivered to the kitchen, marked urgent." He frowned, but after a moment's consideration, gestured toward a corner table where Chambers sat alone with a newspaper and brandy. "Be quick about it. No conversation." I nodded gratefully and proceeded to the table, where I placed the tray before Chambers with a small bow. "Your message, sir." He glanced up, irritated at the interruption, then at the folded paper on the tray. Without looking at me, he waved a dismissive hand. I retreated to a respectful distance but remained within earshot as he opened the note. Inside was a single line of text. "The judge sends his regards from beyond the grave." Chambers' reaction was subtle but unmistakable. A stillness, a slight widening of the eyes, a quick glance around the room. When his gaze found me again, recognition flickered. Not of me personally, we'd never met, but of what I represented, a ghost from a past he thought safely buried. He beckoned me closer with an imperceptible tilt of his head. When I approached, he spoke quietly, lips barely moving. "Outside, 20 minutes, the alley behind Powell Street." I nodded once and withdrew, exiting through the kitchen before the maitre d' could question my lingering presence. 20 minutes later, a carriage pulled into the designated alley. Chambers emerged alone, glancing warily in both directions before approaching where I waited in the shadows. "Who are you?" he demanded without preamble. "Someone with mutual interests," I replied, "and mutual enemies." "The judge is dead, has been for years." "Yes, but his records live on. Detailed, comprehensive records of all his business arrangements, including yours, Governor." His face hardened. "You're blackmailing me." "I prefer to think of it as a business proposition. The same kind the judge might have offered, but with less bloodshed." "What do you want?" "Benjamin Harding." I watched his reaction carefully. "United States Marshal, currently very interested in finding me and certain documents in my possession." Recognition dawned. "You're Morgan, the inside man from the Chiso's raid?" I neither confirmed nor denied this. Harding has become problematic. I need him neutralized, not killed. That creates more problems than it solves. But removed from his position, discredited or at minimum, recalled to Washington where his reach doesn't extend to the West Coast. Chambers considered this, shrewd calculation evident in his expression. And in exchange, the records of your dealings with the judge disappear permanently. How do I know you actually have these alleged records? In answer, I withdrew a single document from my jacket, a bank draft showing a substantial payment from Chambers' personal account to one of the judge's front companies, dated during Chambers' governorship. He examined it, jaw tight. This proves nothing by itself. It's one of dozens, names, dates, amounts, enough to end your business career and any political aspirations you might harbor. A long silence as he weighed his options. Finally, Harding is outside my direct influence. Federal appointment. But not outside your connections. A word in the right ear, concerns about his fitness, his methods, questions about unsolved cases or resource allocation. I shrugged. I leave the specifics to you. The result is what matters. And if I refuse, then copies of the complete record find their way to the San Francisco Chronicle, the Department of Justice, and certain private individuals with personal grievances against you. I understand Senator Williams still blames you for his son's death in that mining accident. Chambers' face paled slightly. The reference to Williams was a calculated risk. The senator's son had indeed died in a suspicious mine collapse while investigating labor abuses. But I had no direct evidence linking Chambers to the event. The reaction, however, suggested my arrow had found its mark. How long, he asked finally, for Harding's removal? 30 days seems reasonable. He laughed harshly. Federal bureaucracy moves slower than that, even with influence. Then visible progress within 30 days, completion within 60. And the documents? Held in trust until the matter is resolved. After confirmation of Harding's neutralization, they'll be destroyed, with one exception. I met his gaze evenly. A sealed package with the most damning evidence remains with a trustworthy third party, to be opened only in the event of my untimely death or my sister's. Consider it life insurance. Chambers studied me with newfound respect. The judge taught you well. The judge taught me the mechanics, I corrected. The motivation is entirely my own. We negotiated further details, verification methods, communication protocols, contingencies. Throughout, Chambers maintained the demeanor of a businessman discussing a routine transaction rather than a conspiracy to remove a federal official. Only the occasional tightness around his eyes betrayed the stakes involved. When we parted, I had secured what I believed was a genuine commitment. Whether born of self-preservation or recognition of a superior position, Chambers had agreed to my terms. Harding would be dealt with, legally, bureaucratically, but no less effectively for that. Over the subsequent weeks, I monitored the situation from Portland, where I'd taken temporary lodging. Newspaper accounts mentioned Harding being recalled to Washington for consultations regarding frontier law enforcement policies. Later reports indicated an internal investigation into procedural irregularities in several high-profile cases. By the time I returned to the coastal cottage in Mary in early July, slightly longer than my promised 2 months but within the grace period she'd allowed, Harding had been reassigned to an administrative position in Washington. A position, I noted with satisfaction, that would keep him firmly tethered to a desk, far from the territories where he'd once wielded practically unchecked authority. "It's done?" Mary asked as we walked along the beach the evening of my return. "As much as these things can ever be done," I replied. "Harding's been neutralized, the documents secured, our insurance policy remains in place." She nodded, accepting this without pressing for details she likely preferred not to know. "And now we live, simply, quietly on our own terms." That was the promise. That was the promise, I agreed, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. And this time, I intend to keep it. The coastal village of Seacliff became our home for the next 30 years. We took new names, David and Margaret Stevens, but made less effort to construct elaborate backstories or maintain rigid performances. We were, as I'd suggested to Mary, simply ourselves with minor adjustments for safety. I invested our remaining funds in a local fishing operation, then expanded into a modest shipping concern that served the smaller ports along the Oregon coast. Mary established a small school in our front parlor, teaching the children of fishermen and loggers who had limited access to formal education. We became part of the community gradually, participating in town meetings, contributing to local improvements, hosting the occasional social gathering. Not as central figures, we maintained a certain reserve that discouraged too much familiarity, but as respected, if somewhat private, citizens. The years passed with remarkable tranquility. Occasionally, news from the wider world would reach us that triggered watchfulness. Harding's promotion to a more senior position in Washington, Chambers' election to the California state legislature, the death of former associates from the outlaw days. But no threats materialized. No suspicious strangers appeared asking questions about our past. Mary never married, though not for lack of suitors. When asked, she would smile and say she had all the family she needed. I suspected the real reason was more complex, that the trauma of our early years had left wounds too deep for conventional relationships to heal. Or perhaps, more simply, she had found contentment in her independence and saw no reason to compromise it. For my part, I remained equally unattached, though for different reasons. The man I had been, the outlaw, the infiltrator, the blackmailer, had shaped me in ways incompatible with the honest intimacy marriage required. I could play the role of David Stevens, respectable businessman, convincingly enough for neighbors and business associates. But sustaining that performance with a wife, day after day, year after year, seemed both impossible and unfair to any woman who might have genuine feelings for the man she thought I was. So we remained, the Stevens siblings, content in our quiet lives, our shared secrets, our hard-won peace, until 1924, when the past found us one final time. I was 75 then, semi-retired from the shipping business, spending my days tending a small garden overlooking the ocean and reading the books I'd never had time for in my younger years. Mary, 70, still taught occasional lessons to the grandchildren of her original students, though her formal school had closed decades earlier when the town built a proper one. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, familiar handwriting on unfamiliar stationery. No return address, postmarked Washington, D.C., Morgan, or whatever name you're using now. If you're reading this, I've preceded you to whatever judgment awaits men like us. My doctors give me weeks, not months. At 92, I've outlived most of my enemies and all of my friends. You're among the former, I suppose, though time may have softened that distinction. I never found your documents. Spent years looking off and on when other duties permitted. Chambers wouldn't talk, even after his disgrace in '98. Professional courtesy, perhaps, or honor among thieves. I write not to reopen old wounds, but to close them. Whatever game we were playing ended long ago, with no clear winner. You escaped justice for your crimes. I escaped justice for mine. We both lived lives neither of us likely deserved. The man who delivers this letter is my grandson, Benjamin. He knows nothing of our history, merely that I asked him to locate an old acquaintance and deliver a personal message. Do him no harm. The sins of the grandfather need not transfer to the innocent. Perhaps we'll continue our unfinished business in the hereafter. Until then, I remain Benjamin Harding, Sr., former U.S. Marshal. I read the letter twice, then burned it in the garden's small fire pit, where I disposed of weeds and fallen branches. The ashes were still warm when a knock came at the front door. Mary answered, then called for me. "David, there's a young man here to see you." He stood in our parlor, tall, straight-backed, with Harding's jawline but softer eyes. Perhaps 30, dressed in the current Eastern fashion, hat in hand. "Mr. Stevens?" he inquired politely. "My name is Benjamin Harding. My grandfather asked me to deliver a message." "Your grandfather," I repeated, studying him for signs of duplicity, but finding none. I wasn't aware the former marshal and I had any unfinished business. "I wouldn't know about that, sir." His manner was respectful, genuinely puzzled. "He only said I'd find you here, using this name, and that the delivery was important to him. He's quite ill, you see. So his letter mentioned—" Young Harding shifted uncomfortably. "There's one more thing. He asked me to tell you personally that the box in San Diego is empty and has been since '90. He said you'd understand." I did. The safety deposit box that had supposedly contained Cobb's damning documentation, empty for 34 years, which meant Harding had found it somehow, but not the documents themselves, which I'd removed to another location long ago. A final confirmation that our decades-long shadow war had ended in stalemate. "Thank you for delivering the message," I said, extending my hand. "Please convey to your grandfather that I understand and that old debts are settled." He shook my hand, visibly relieved that his mysterious errand was completed without complication. After declining our offer of refreshment, he departed, the last link to a past I'd spent a lifetime trying to escape. Mary joined me on the porch as we watched young Harding's automobile disappear down the coastal road. "Is it truly over?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. "With Harding gone, the last person who knows who we really are will be gone too." "Not the last," she corrected gently. "We know." I glanced at her, my sister, my constant, the one person who had walked beside me through hell and back. Gray now where she had once been auburn, lines mapping her face where there had once been youthful smoothness, but her eyes unchanged. Clear, direct, unflinching. "Yes," I agreed, taking her hand. "We know, and perhaps that's enough. To be known, truly known, by at least one person in this world." We sat in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific, painting the water in familiar golds and crimsons. The same ocean, the same sunset we'd watched for 30 years. Yet somehow different now, unburdened perhaps of the last vestiges of vigilance we'd maintained even in our contentment. "What will you do now?" Mary asked eventually. "Now that you don't need to be watching for ghosts?" I considered the question. At 75, my future was necessarily limited in scope. Yet the absence of threat, of the need for constant awareness, opened possibilities I'd never fully allowed myself to contemplate. "I think," I said slowly, "I might write down our story, not for publication or public consumption, just for us, for truth's sake." She squeezed my hand. "I'd like that. A record of who we really were beneath all the names and personas." "Who we are," I corrected gently. "The story isn't finished yet." "No," she agreed, smiling. "Not quite yet." And so in the twilight of my life, I began this account, the true story of Jedediah Ghost Morgan, outlaw turned spy, turned fugitive, turned ordinary man. I write it not to glorify or excuse, but simply to bear witness to a life lived in the shadows of America's frontier justice, where the lines between lawman and outlaw were often as ephemeral as morning mist on the desert. I have killed men. I have betrayed trust. I have blackmailed and threatened and manipulated. I have also loved fiercely, protected steadfastly, and ultimately found a measure of redemption